nails, so let's jump right into it. First, I'm going to start off with cuticle prep. I'm applying a generous amount of cuticle remover around my cuticle area, then using a cuticle pusher to gently push them back and clear away any of that dead buildup on my nail plate. This step is key for good retention, and once that's done, I'll wash everything off thoroughly with soap and water to make sure all the remover is gone. Next, I trim my nails a little bit. They were already short, so I just wanted to kind of shorten the length a little bit more, but I just cut off as much as I could. And since I clipped them, I also filed the edges with a glass hand file from the Creme Shop. Glass hand files are really gentle on natural nails, and they're perfect for smoothing out any of those rough spots from clipping. After that, I buffed the surface of my nails with my little heart-shaped buffing block. I used the grittier side to remove the shine. You can also use a sanding band to speed things up, but I kind of prefer to just keep it really gentle and light-handed because I already do my nails so often, so this mini buffing block works perfect for me. Once the shine is gone, I sprayed some rubbing alcohol all over my nails and wiped them down with a lint-free wipe to remove all the dust and debris. Then I went in with a nail dehydrator, and I applied it to each nail to make sure that there's no oils left on the nail plate. This step is super important because you want your nails completely clean and dry before applying any kind of extensions. Now I'm going in with the Young Nails Protein Bond. This is my all-time favorite nail primer. I recommend this one to anyone who wants 4+ weeks of retention because with proper prep, it can seriously last a long time. It's one of those hyped up products that actually deserve the hype. I'm just going to apply one coat to each nail. You only really need one, but if you struggle with lifting, you can add a second one too. Then I let it dry down for a couple of minutes before moving on. Next, I'm going to use the Jello Peel Off Base Coat. This is the product that helps me pop off my nail extensions after wearing them, instead of giving them a soak off. With proper prep, my nails can last 3 weeks. The serum that comes with it helps the peel off process, but I know a lot of you might not want to use a peel off base coat. You just want to have the Polygel on your natural nails and have them last long. So I'll put written instructions in the description box down below for doing this tutorial without the need of a peel off base coat, along with all the other products I'm going to use in today's video. For this set though, I'm going to use my peel off base coat because I want these nails off after just a week. So I'm applying a thin layer and then I'm going to cure it in my nail lamp for 60 seconds and give them a full cure. After that, I'm sizing out my nail tips. I'm using my favorite long square tips from Amazon. These are non-C-curve, so if you have flatter nail beds, these will work perfectly for you. When sizing, make sure that the tips fit your nails from sidewall to sidewall. It should cover the whole free edge, but none of the nail tips should overlap onto your skin. Once you've figured out your closest size, just set them aside for now. I'm pulling out my handy UV flower nail lamp to adhere my nail tips using the Jello Peel Off Base Coat. If you're using a peel off base coat like me, you can definitely go in with the Jello to adhere them, or you could use a base coat or a gel nail glue. Any of those will work. If you're not using a peel off base coat, you can go ahead and just use regular air dry nail glue. I'm applying a little bit of the Jello onto my nail tip and placing it on my nail, and then flash curing it under my lamp for 15 seconds to hold its place. I'll repeat that on all the nails, and once they're all secured, I'll cure my whole hand in my big lamp for 60 seconds to make sure everything is fully set. Since I'm doing a short set today, I'm going to trim down the tips quite a bit. And now it's time to blend them. I'm using my e-file with a 240 grit sanding band at around 6,000 RPM to carefully blend the extensions into my natural nails. I'm being very careful not to file away the peel off base coat. And once that's blended, I lightly etch the surface of my extensions to remove the shine. This will just help the Polygel grip and prevent separation, and I'll repeat this process on each nail. You could definitely use a grittier sanding band if you'd like. For example, a 180 grit or an 80 grit. If you want to speed things up, I just used a 240 grit because that's what I had on hand, and it works fine. Next, you're going to want to file the sidewalls and the very tips of the extensions using a hand file. Just a few seconds of filing on each side will make everything more straight and even, and it'll just make your shape super sharp and crispy. Just remember to keep your hand file as straight as possible. Since the Jello Peel Off Base Coat is sticky, the dust likes to stick to it, so I'm going to wipe it clean with some rubbing alcohol and a lint-free wipe. For today's set, I'm going to use a polygel called French Press from Macart, which feels pretty fitting for a French manicure tutorial. It's a beautiful soft nude shade, and it honestly pairs beautifully with French nails. Before I apply any polygel to my nails, I want to quickly show you guys what you'll need and how to prep your brush with the slip solution. So you're going to need a small dish for your liquid. I'm using 70% isopropyl alcohol, but you could also use 90% if you prefer. You'll also need a dual-ended polygel brush. This brush has both bristles and a spatula on either side. Plus you're going to need a good stack of lint-free wipes, since we're going to be reaching for those a lot during application. I like to dip the bristles into the alcohol until they're fully soaked, then drain the excess along the side of my dish. That usually isn't quite enough though, so I like to gently pat the brush onto my lint-free wipe and hold it for about 2 to 3 seconds. At that point, your brush should be perfectly saturated. Before I go in with polygel, I'm going to start by applying a base coat from Madame Glam. It's just a standard gel base coat, nothing too fancy. And I'll cure it for 60 seconds before going in with the polygel. This is going to give our polygel that grip it needs to stick onto the nails. For the polygel application, I'm going to start with my first bead, placing it from the nail bed to the free edge. And using my brush, I'm going to gently spread the gel from side to side, keeping it as even as possible. I work it until it reaches both side walls, and while I'm doing this, I'm making sure that my brush is fully saturated to avoid getting any of the gel caught in the bristles. Once I've got it blended from side to side, I'm going to start blending it flat onto my nail bed. This will just help the next bead lay down more smoothly. And once that's blended in, I'm going to start swiping the gel down with my brush, keeping it very straight and also well saturated. This is really important because again, polygel can stick to the dry brush, especially when you're doing swiping motions. So just make sure that your polygel brush is always saturated. But once you've got everything down to the free edge of your nail, you can go ahead and trim off that extra polygel with the spatula end of your brush, and then go ahead and cure this bead for 90 seconds to set it in. Now on to the next bead. I scooped it up with the spatula end of my brush and placed it just underneath the cuticle, making sure to leave a small gap so it doesn't overflow onto the skin. And then I repeated the same steps as before, spreading the polygel evenly from sidewall to sidewall. And once that was done, I carefully tucked the gel near the cuticle. You want to leave a very tiny gap between the gel and the cuticle. You don't want to go all the way up to your skin. Once everything's good with the cuticle area and the sidewalls are set, you can start sweeping the excess gel down to add more coverage to the rest of the nail. And by gently swiping the excess gel down, you'll be creating your apex at the same time. Before curing this bead, you want to take a clean brush with some acetone or rubbing alcohol and make sure that none of the polygel is touching your skin. Then go ahead and cure this bead for 90 seconds. I repeated this process on all of my nails, and once everything was cured, I cleaned off the sticky inhibition layer with acetone before moving on to filing. I like to use my drill at around 20,000 RPM. I usually go slower when I'm working with my non-dominant hand, but for my right hand, which is dominant, I like to use it at 20,000. I'm basically just going to start filing from sidewall to sidewall and removing any excess bulk and bumpiness on my nails. As you can see, there are some spots that are untouched by the file, and that tells me that I need to go even more and just keep filing the area until everything is touched by the sanding band. And once everything looks roughened up, then you'll know that your nail is going to be smooth, and then you can move on. I continued shaping my nails, focusing on removing all the bulk, rather than focusing on the sidewalls for now. I also like to lightly file the free edge of my nail with my drill to just refine the shape. When it comes to sealing the cuticles, I always slow down my drill to around 8,000 RPM. I don't like to go any faster than that, especially near the cuticles, not only to avoid removing too much product, but also to avoid injuring myself. And I'm basically just going to file it until the polygel lays flush with my natural nails. If you applied your cuticle bead perfectly, you probably don't have to do much for this step. I always get a little bit of extra bulk near my cuticles, so I do have to file it down most of the time, which is exactly what I'm doing here. I'm just refining the shape and making a little bit less round. But once that's taken care of, then I move on to my other nails. For all my other nails, I just focus on shaping the lengths first, then I move on to the cuticles, and I repeat this process until I reach my desired shape. And by the way, I'm using an 80 grit sanding band. Next, I like to file the sidewalls by hand using a 180 grit hand file. I mostly focus on the sidewalls and at the free edge of my nails to get a crisp and straight shape. Next, I'm buffing my nails with a buffing block. using the finer and softer side. This helps smooth out the surface and removes any scratches left from the filing process. I usually buff each nail for around 30 seconds to a minute. You don't need to worry too much about buffing, but you just want to buff out the majority of the scratches. After buffing, I wash my hands thoroughly with soap and water to remove all the dust. Then I spray my nails with some rubbing alcohol to remove any leftover oils from the soap, just to make sure that my nail surface is completely clean before applying any sort of gel polish. For French manicures or any detailed line work on polygel nails, I always recommend using a matte top coat first. It creates the smoothest surface to work on, so I'll just apply a thin layer of this and cure it under my lamp for 60 seconds. And this layer is basically going to give you a perfectly smooth canvas for your nail art. Now I'm going in with my absolute favorite white gel polish ever. This one is from Valentino Beauty Pure. This is just genuinely my favorite white gel polish so far. It's super pigmented and easy to work with. For the nail art, I'm going to use a 15mm liner brush, but if you're working on longer nails, I would suggest using a 20. And I'm just going to coat the bristles in the polish and wipe off the excess. You don't want too much product on your brush, you just kind of want an even distribution. Now, there's a lot of ways to do a French tip. I'm just going to share my go-to methods. This first technique is, I believe, called the V method. It's where you paint a line to mark where your smile line will begin, then just draw a small line directly down the center of your nail, and this acts as your focal point. Then you can connect it with the sidewalls in this little V-shaped lines that taper down from the free edge. And that'll give you like a perfectly symmetrical French tip. In my opinion, this method is like the best if you're focusing on symmetry and perfect results. I just find that every time I use it, I never fail. But of course, there are different ways to do Frenchies. For example, this next method, you'll need a cleanup brush and some acetone or rubbing alcohol. With this technique, you're just going to want to paint the white gel polish over the entire area where your French tip will be. And then use your brush to clean up the edges and shape your tip. This one isn't really my personal favorite, but it does work pretty well, and it's really satisfying to do. I just find that it's a little bit easier to accidentally get gel on the skin if you're not careful. That said, it definitely does work, and a lot of people like to do Frenchies this way, and for a pretty good reason. Now this next one, I like to kind of call the ombre method. Obviously it's not called this, I'm not really sure what it's called, but basically I'm gonna paint just the free edge of my nail, almost like I'm starting an ombre design, but then I use my liner brush to create the smile line and complete the French tip. This one is probably one of my most used methods because it's just really quick and you get a pretty good result. The last method is the freehand method. I think this one takes the most amount of practice, but it definitely gets easier to do once you've got a hang of doing French nails. That being said, some people like to jump straight into doing freehand, and that's totally fine. But if you're just starting, I'd recommend trying at least some of the techniques before and see which one you're most comfortable with. I personally started with the V method and then eventually moved on to freehand. But yeah, everyone is different and everyone learns at different paces, so just find whatever feels comfortable to you. Once your French tips are done, you can add a glossy top coat or a matte top coat and give your nails a finishing file. This is especially helpful if you're doing square nails like me. It really helps sharpen the shape and just makes everything look so much more neat at the end. Finish off with some cuticle oil to rehydrate your nails and the surrounding skin. And here are the finished nails. Remember, nail art takes practice, but you can absolutely do it. I believe in you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching this. I hope